No, it's week 5, the course, and we're starting to get into... Hello, Robolawyer. Goodness gracious me, what are you wearing this week? Oh, what's this? What? Vote yes for our republic. Again, you're a little bit behind the times, because we had that referendum a few years ago and the people voted no. They didn't want to change the constitution to make us a republic. Maybe it'll come around again sometime, I don't know. What's that? Your face. What are you wearing on your face apart from your blue glasses? A black mask. Oh, you're being a criminal. Because this week we talk about crime and punishment. That's right. We look at what constitutes a crime. We look at types of punishment which can be handed out for those found guilty of a crime. And it's an overview. It's an overview, Robolawyer. We don't have to know a lot of detail about different sorts of crimes. In fact, the definition of a crime is any behaviour which the law says is a crime. Now, sometimes people say but certain behaviours are good and other behaviours are bad, and that's sort of a bit like morality. So when they talk about that, they talk about morality, and there is an overlap between what's moral behaviours and behaviours which are immoral and classified as crimes, but there's not a complete overlap. In fact, when you're looking at crime, you're looking at the different sorts of behaviours which are classified as either indictable offences, where a person is charged and the case is heard before a judge and jury. They're the more serious offences. Or there are what are called summary offences. Now that's where the matter is heard before a magistrate, judicial officer sitting alone. Where do you find the criminal law? Well, these days, Robolawyer, most of the criminal law, in fact all of the criminal law, is found in statute. So people can actually go and see what the law is. It's not the situation where people do something and then they found they've breached common law in some area. When we talk about the penalties which can be imposed, that's quite an interesting area, because the penalties which have been imposed have changed over time, and as society's changed, we've gotten rid of some of the more extreme forms of punishment. For example, we don't have capital punishment in Australia, although there are certain countries in the world which still have capital punishment. That's where we put the offender to death. We don't have corporal punishment anymore in Australia. That's where they use physical punishments like floggings and whippings, those sorts of things. And we don't use mutilation, where we don't cut off the offender's ears or nose and things like that. Yes, Robolawyer, unfortunately there are some countries in the world which still do that. Yes. Well, I don't know. I don't think that should happen to anybody, no matter how bad they've been. Because we've got to deal with the people. Maybe they're not really well. We don't know. In fact, when we hand out penalties, we've got to take into account a number of things. We've got to take into the account the idea that the offender has to be punished. It also stops other people doing it. That's called being a deterrent. It protects the rest of society, especially if a person's got really antisocial behaviours, and we don't really want them out wandering around committing further crimes or harming other people in society. And the other thing is, we need to try to rehabilitate the offender. That means get them to change their ways, the way they behave, so that when they are eventually released into society again, they present less of a danger. So that's the important thing. And in fact, when a court imposes a sentence, they're the sort of factors they take into account. sometimes the law actually says that the penalty for this offence is a particular penalty and it can't be varied. Now, that's called mandatory sentencing. An example of that is in the Queensland Criminal Code. The penalty for murder under Queensland law is life imprisonment. It's mandatory life. So other types of sentencing where the judicial officer has a discretion, that's right, Robolawyer, it's called discretionary sentencing. And in fact, the types of penalties which can be imposed are considered in a piece of Queensland legislation called the Penalties and Sentences Act. And in fact, if you go to the Corrective Services webpage, you'll find lots of information about types of penalties that can be imposed. And in fact, everyone who is convicted of an offence doesn't necessarily go to jail. We don't have everyone in custody. We have non-custodial penalties, which include fines, community service, probation and parole, even intensive correction orders where the offender is still allowed in the community, but they have conditions imposed on how they live their life. And then we have the custodial sentences, and they're generally given as a last resort where a person has a history of offending or the offence is so serious that the law says it has to be custodial sentence. And the other thing is, when we're talking about crime and punishment too, it's all very well to talk about the offenders, but in recent times there's been extra focus on the victims of crime, people who've actually been a victim where someone has assaulted them, robbed them, injured them in some way, and the state government compensation schemes available for them nowadays. So that's another change. The other one is that we have what's called a concerned persons register, where if someone's been a victim of a crime, they are able to find out about the history of the offender and the progress of the offender through the prison system, and they know when the offender is likely to come out and be released. So that's another development forward. So this whole idea of crime and punishment is not more than just criminal responsibility. It's more than just sort of what penalties can be applied. It's sort of supporting other people who've been involved unwillingly and have suffered injury as well. So the whole idea of the criminal justice system is fairly wide. It's very, very complicated. In fact, yes, there are a lot of psychologists working in prisons, working with offenders, trying to help them to change their behaviour, rehabilitation. And that's very important because a lot of those people are going to get out one day, and if we haven't done anything for them, there's no guarantee that they won't behave in exactly the same way again. So one of the ideas of rehabilitating people is to protect society. That's what, yes, you might say we should lock them all up and throw away the key, but that's awfully expensive and it doesn't do a lot of good in the long run. Yes, okay. No, I don't think we're going to reintroduce capital punishment at all. Yes, we have moved forward, even though they didn't vote for the Republic, I know, but don't worry about that. It will change over time, Robolawyer. It's like your fashion sense is really, really very strange. But people do like you. They like looking at you. Anyway, say goodbye for this week, Robolawyer. Last year you had Easter bunny ears on at this time, what? You couldn't find them, that's why you're not wearing them. Did you look in the cupboard at home? Yes, we did, didn't we? And we couldn't find your bunny ears. Anyway, goodbye, everyone. Goodbye, Robolawyer. I think that went well, Robolawyer. You think so too? Yeah, I think they really like you. You get the fan mail. Oh, yes, you do. If I weren't so mature, I'd actually get jealous of you, Robolawyer.